Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport buzzed with its usual morning energy as travelers hurried through the sprawling terminals. In Terminal F, near the domestic arrivals area, a well-dressed man in his late 40s sat patiently in one of the leather chairs, checking his phone every few minutes. Thomas Mitchell, known to millions of Americans as the charismatic host of the popular reality show Southern Charm Living, had arrived at the airport 2 hours early to pick up his wife. After 3 months of being apart due to conflicting filming schedules, he was eager to see Julia again. She was returning from Los Angeles, where she'd been filming her own cooking show, Julia's Kitchen Chronicles, dressed in a navy blazer, crisp white shirt and khaki pants. Thomas looked every bit the successful television personality he was. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and despite the early hour, he appeared fresh and alert. He'd always prided himself on his appearance. It was part of his brand, after all. The terminal's modern architecture, with its soaring ceilings and abundant natural light, usually energized Thomas. But today, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The past few months had been challenging for their marriage. Both of their careers were demanding, and the constant travel had put a strain on their relationship. They'd had several heated discussions before Julia left for California, and Thomas was determined to make things right. Flight AA-2847 from Los Angeles is scheduled to arrive at Gate F-12 at 10:30 a.m. He read from his phone for the third time. It was only 8:15 a.m., but Thomas had always been the type to arrive early for important occasions, and this felt like the most important reunion of their 15-year marriage. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media, seeing comments from fans who recognized him from his show. Thomas had built his career on being relatable and down-to-earth despite his success. His show focused on Southern hospitality, family values, and the importance of home, themes that resonated deeply with his audience. "I hope we can get back to what we used to be," he thought, remembering the early days of their marriage when they were just starting their careers in local television. Success had brought them many blessings, but it had also complicated their lives in ways they never anticipated. Security supervisor Mark Johnson had been working at Hartsfield-Jackson for over 12 years, and he prided himself on his ability to spot unusual behavior. During his morning rounds, he noticed a man who had been sitting in the same spot for over an hour, frequently checking his phone and occasionally taking photos of the area around him. "Hey, Rodriguez," Mark called to his colleague, Officer Elena. Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed security professional with 5 years of airport experience. "See that guy in the blazer? He's been there a while." Elena followed Mark's gaze to where Thomas was sitting. "Yeah, I noticed him too. He seems to be watching people pretty intently." What they didn't realize was that Thomas, as a television personality, had developed a habit of people-watching. It was part of how he came up with content for his show, observing human interactions and family dynamics. To him, it was second nature, but to the security team, it looked suspicious. "With all the new protocols we've got, we should probably check it out," Mark said. Recent security briefings had emphasized the importance of monitoring individuals who lingered in the airport for extended periods, especially those who seemed to be studying the layout or taking photos. Thomas, oblivious to the attention he was drawing, continued to wait patiently. He'd sent Julia a text letting her know he was at the airport early, and she'd responded with heart emojis and a message saying she couldn't wait to see him. That small exchange had lifted his spirits considerably. "Excuse me, sir." Mark approached Thomas, with Officer Rodriguez beside him. "Could we have a word with you?" Thomas looked up, initially assuming they were fans who had recognized him. It wouldn't be the first time airport staff had approached him for a photo or autograph. He smiled warmly. "Of course. How can I help you folks? We've noticed you've been here for quite a while," Mark continued, his tone professional but probing. "Are you waiting for a flight?" "Actually, I'm waiting for my wife's flight. She's coming in from LA in about 2 hours, Thomas maintained. His friendly demeanor, though he was beginning to sense this wasn't a fan interaction. 2 hours? Elena interjected. That's quite early to be waiting. Thomas chuckled. I know it sounds excessive, but I wanted to make sure I didn't hit traffic or miss her. We've been apart for 3 months. The security officers exchanged glances. While the explanation seemed reasonable, their training had taught them to dig deeper when something felt off. What started as a routine inquiry quickly began to take on a more serious tone. Mark Johnson, influenced by recent security briefings about individuals who might be conducting surveillance, decided to probe further into Thomas's presence at the airport. Sir, could I see some identification? Mark requested, pulling out a small notepad. Thomas, though surprised by the formal turn the conversation had taken, complied readily. Sure thing. He handed over his driver's license, expecting this would clear up any confusion. Thomas Mitchell, Mark read aloud, then looked up. And you said you're here to pick up your wife. That's right. Julia Mitchell. She's on American Airlines Flight 2847 from Los Angeles. Elena studied Thomas more carefully. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Mr. Mitchell, what do you do for work? I'm in television, Thomas replied, still maintaining his friendly tone, despite growing concern about where this was heading. I host a show called Southern Charm Living. This information didn't register with either officer, as neither was familiar with the show. To them, Thomas was just another person with a potentially suspicious story. Television, Mark repeated, writing in his notepad. And your wife is also in television? Yes. She has her own cooking show. We were both filming in different locations, which is why we've been apart, Elena frowned. So you both travel frequently for work? How do we know you're really here to meet your wife and not for some other purpose? Thomas felt his patience beginning to wear thin. What other purpose would I have? I'm sitting here quietly, waiting for my wife. I haven't bothered anyone or done anything suspicious. Sir, you've been taking photos and observing the area for over an hour, Mark pointed out. That's considered unusual behavior. Photos? Thomas looked confused, then realized they must be referring to the few snapshots he'd taken to send to Julia, showing her he was already at the airport. I sent a couple of pictures to my wife to let her know I was here. That's hardly suspicious. Mr. Mitchell, Elena said, stepping closer, we're going to need to verify your story. Do you have any documentation showing your wife's flight information? Thomas pulled out his phone and showed them his text conversation with Julia, including the flight details she'd sent him. However, the officers seemed unimpressed by the evidence. Anyone could create these messages, Mark said dismissively. We need something more official. The conversation was attracting the attention of other travelers, and Thomas began to feel embarrassed. As a public figure, the last thing he wanted was to create a scene that might end up on social media or in the tabloids. Assistant Supervisor Carol Williams had been monitoring the situation from a distance and decided to intervene when she saw the conversation becoming more intense. With over 15 years of experience in airport security, Carol had dealt with numerous delicate situations and prided herself on her ability to de-escalate conflicts. What's the situation here? Carol asked as she approached the group. Mark quickly briefed her on their concerns about Thomas's extended presence and behavior. We've got a man who's been here for over an hour, taking photos, and his story about waiting for his wife doesn't check out completely. Thomas turned to Carol, hoping that a supervisor might bring more reason to the situation. Ma'am, I'm simply waiting for my wife's flight. I can show you all the evidence you need. Carol studied Thomas for a moment. Like her colleagues, she didn't recognize him, but she could see he was well-dressed and articulate. However, recent training sessions had emphasized the importance of not making assumptions based on appearance. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but we have protocols to follow, Carol explained. Given the current security climate, we can't take any chances with individuals who display unusual patterns of behavior. Unusual patterns? Thomas's voice rose slightly. I'm sitting in a public area, waiting for my wife. How's that unusual? Sir, please keep your voice down, Elena interjected. You're creating a disturbance. This comment frustrated Thomas even more. He was known for his calm demeanor on television, but the situation was testing his patience. I'm not creating a disturbance. I'm trying to understand why you're treating me like a criminal. Carol made a decision. Mr. Mitchell, we're going to have to ask you to wait outside the secure area until your wife's flight actually arrives. You can return once the plane has landed. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. You're kicking me out? For what? We're not kicking you out, Carol clarified, though her tone was firm. We're asking you to wait in a more appropriate area given the circumstances. This is ridiculous, Thomas said, standing up from his chair. I have every right to be here. I'm not doing anything wrong. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to involve airport police, Mark warned. The mention of police made Thomas realize how serious the situation had become. As a public figure, any involvement with law enforcement could potentially damage his career and reputation. Other travelers were now openly staring, and Thomas noticed at least one person discreetly recording with their phone. Feeling he had no choice, Thomas gathered his belongings. Fine, I'll wait outside. But this is completely unreasonable, and you're making a big mistake. We appreciate your cooperation, Carol said, though she was beginning to have doubts about their decision. As Thomas was escorted toward the exit, he felt a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. In all his years of traveling for his show, he had never experienced anything like this. The area outside the domestic arrivals at Hartsfield-Jackson was bustling with activity, but it was also considerably less comfortable than the climate-controlled interior. Thomas found a spot near the pickup lane where he could keep an eye on the exit doors, though he felt frustrated by his inability to meet Julia right at the gate as he had planned. He immediately called Julia, but as expected, her phone went straight to voicemail since she was still in flight. Hey, honey, it's me. There's been a ridiculous situation at the airport with security. I'm waiting outside instead of inside, but don't worry, I'll be right here when you come out. Can't wait to see you. Love you. Thomas then sat on one of the concrete barriers, feeling the weight of the situation. As someone who had built his career on being trustworthy and relatable, being treated as a security threat was particularly galling. He watched as families reunited inside the terminal, seeing the joy and excitement he had hoped to share with Julia. This is going to be a hell of a story to tell her, he thought, trying to find some humor in the situation despite his frustration. A few other people waiting outside struck up conversations with him. An elderly man waiting for his grandson commented, "Security sure has gotten strict these days, hasn't it?" "You have no idea," Thomas replied, though he didn't elaborate on his specific situation. As he waited, Thomas began to worry about how this experience might affect his reunion with Julia. They had both been looking forward to this moment for months, and he had imagined surprising her at the gate with flowers and a warm embrace. Instead, their reunion would now take place in a parking lot, with him having to explain why he'd been ejected from the terminal. He checked his phone repeatedly, watching the flight tracker app that showed Julia's plane was on schedule. 1 hour and 15 minutes, he calculated. I can handle this. Thomas also found himself wondering if the security officers had any idea who he was. While his show was popular, he realized that not everyone would recognize him, especially airport security personnel who probably didn't watch reality television during their shifts. Maybe I should have mentioned the show more prominently, he thought, then immediately felt foolish for thinking his celebrity status should exempt him from security procedures. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the entire situation had been handled poorly. Julia Mitchell stepped off the plane at Hartsfield-Jackson, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. The 3 months in Los Angeles had been professionally rewarding. Her cooking show had been renewed for another season, but personally challenging. Being away from Thomas for so long had made her realize how much she valued their partnership, both personal and professional. At 42, Julia had maintained the warm, approachable demeanor that made her popular with television audiences. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore comfortable travel clothes, jeans, a soft sweater, and sneakers. Despite the long flight, she was eager to see Thomas and begin rebuilding the closeness they had lost during their time apart. As she walked through the terminal toward baggage claim, Julia turned on her phone and immediately saw Thomas's voicemail. Confused and concerned by his message about a ridiculous situation with security, she called him back immediately. "Thomas, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart, but it's been an interesting morning," Thomas replied, his voice carrying a mixture of frustration and relief at hearing her voice. "Airport security decided I was suspicious for waiting for you, so they made me wait outside." "What? That's crazy. Where are you now?" "I'm outside the arrivals area near the pickup lane. Just come straight out and you'll see me." Julia felt a surge of protectiveness toward her husband. "This is ridiculous. I'm coming to find you, but first I'm going to have a word with these security people." "Julia, don't worry about it. Let's just go home and put this behind us." But Julia was already determined to address the situation. As someone who had spent years in television, she understood the importance of standing up for yourself when you've been treated unfairly. After collecting her luggage, Julia approached the security desk near the arrivals area. She could see officers, Johnson, Rodriguez, and Supervisor Williams, discussing something near their station. "Excuse me," Julia said, approaching them with a confident but controlled demeanor. "I believe you had an interaction with my husband earlier today, Thomas Mitchell." Mark Johnson looked up, immediately recognizing that this was likely the wife Thomas had mentioned. "Yes, ma'am. And you are?" "I'm Julia Mitchell. I understand you removed my husband from the terminal for waiting for my flight?" Carol Williams stepped forward, sensing that this conversation required careful handling. "Mrs. Mitchell, we followed standard security protocols. Your husband was exhibiting behavior that required investigation." "What behavior?" Julia asked, her voice firm but professional. "Waiting for his wife's flight," Elena Rodriguez explained. "Ma'am, he was here for over an hour taking photographs, and we couldn't verify his story adequately." Julia pulled out her phone and showed them her text conversation with Thomas, including photos he had sent from the airport. "Here's your verification. And as for taking photographs, he was sending me pictures to let me know he was here early." The 3 security officers exchanged glances, beginning to realize that they might have made an error in judgment. Julia continued to calmly but firmly address the security team's actions. "My husband is Thomas Mitchell from Southern Charm Living. He's a well-known television personality who was simply excited to see his wife after 3 months apart. The fact that he arrived early should have been seen as thoughtful, not suspicious." Mark Johnson's eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. "Wait, Southern Charm Living. My wife watches that show." He looked embarrassed as he realized they had completely mishandled the situation. Carol Williams also began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Not only had they treated an innocent person poorly, but they had also potentially created a public relations nightmare by ejecting a television personality from the airport. "Mrs. Mitchell," Carol said, her tone becoming more apologetic, "I think there may have been a significant misunderstanding here." "You think?" Julia replied, though she kept her voice level. "My husband has been traveling through airports for years for his show. He's never had an incident like this because he's never done anything to warrant one." Elena Rodriguez stepped Forward. Ma'am, we apologize. We were following protocols, but perhaps we were overly cautious in this situation. Julia appreciated the apology, but wasn't finished. The issue isn't just that you made a mistake. It's that you treated my husband as guilty until proven innocent, when he was doing nothing more than any loving spouse would do. At this point, Thomas appeared in the terminal, having grown concerned when Julia didn't come outside. When he saw her talking to the security officers, he quickly joined the group. "Everything okay here?" Thomas asked, putting his arm around Julia. "Actually, I think we owe both of you a sincere apology," Carol Williams said, addressing them both. "We realize now that we misinterpreted the situation and handled it inappropriately." Mark Johnson nodded in agreement. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell, we're sorry for the inconvenience and embarrassment we caused. You were doing nothing wrong, and we should have recognized that." Thomas looked at the three officers, seeing genuine remorse in their expressions. Despite his frustration, he had always believed in second chances and the importance of forgiveness, values he often discussed on his show. "I appreciate the apology," Thomas said. "I hope this experience can serve as a learning opportunity. Sometimes security protocols need to be balanced with common sense and basic courtesy." Julia squeezed her husband's hand, proud of his gracious response despite how poorly he had been treated. "We'll definitely be reviewing our procedures," Carol assured them. "And again, we're truly sorry for disrupting your reunion." As Thomas and Julia walked away together, hand in hand, Julia looked at her husband with admiration. "I'm proud of how you handled that." "Thanks for standing up for me back there," Thomas replied. "I missed having you in my corner." "Always," Julia said, smiling. "That's what partners do." The incident, while frustrating, had actually reminded them both of what they valued most about their relationship: their unwavering support for each other. As they headed home together, they felt closer than they had in months. 2 weeks later, Carol Williams implemented new training protocols for her security team, emphasizing the importance of proportional responses and better communication skills when dealing with travelers. The incident with the Mitchells had served as a valuable reminder that security and courtesy could coexist. Mark Johnson, inspired by the encounter, actually started watching Southern Charm Living with his wife and gained a new appreciation for the show's emphasis on family values and treating others with respect. For Thomas and Julia Mitchell, the airport incident became a story they would tell for years, not as a complaint, but as an example of how challenges can sometimes bring couples closer together. Their reunion, though delayed and complicated, had ultimately reinforced their commitment to supporting each other through anything life might throw their way. Thomas even incorporated the experience into a future episode of his show, using it as a teaching moment about the importance of patience, understanding, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. Lessons that resonated deeply with his audience and reminded everyone that behind every security protocol and every traveler, there are real human stories worth understanding.